Good afternoon. Welcome to virtual 412. I don't even know what week this is, 5 or 6 maybe. We are starting a new series today called Family Feud, hence why I'm wearing my family ministry shirt, which I think this is super appropriate just, based on the situation we're in. You're obviously spending way more time with your families than you probably ever would have, or maybe will in the future. And I think it's normal and understandable to get frustrated with your parents, with your siblings, with your pets. I find myself getting more frustrated with the pets than I have before. And it's understandable. And so I thought this kind of series was super appropriately timed in the midst of all of this, just to kind of give us some wisdom on how to kind of deal with our families and deal with ourselves. And just, again, understanding that everything that we're feeling and going through is normal and appropriate. I think hopefully what we learn from this is just kind of, okay, so it's appropriate to feel angry, it's appropriate to feel frustrated, but what do I do with it? Like, how do I deal with it, and how do I continue to just live my life, because this is getting really hard. So the big idea for today is be patient with your family like God is patient with you. And it's funny, reading this, because I've always been told, don't pray for patience, because then you'll be given opportunities to practice patience. And so it's hard to say that. Well, what do you mean? Be patient with my family? Anyway, so hopefully, again, by the end of this video, you have some tangible way to learn to work on being patient with your family. Okay, so let me tell you, it's funny, the last time I lost patience with a family member was, 5 minutes ago. And again, my situation is a little bit different. Obviously, it's just me and Andy, and we have Lila, who is 2, and toddlers love to exert their independence and opinions. And yeah, 10 minutes ago, I tried to put her down for a nap, and she wants to read this book and wants to do this and doesn't want to wear these clothes and wants, and all of these things. And so I find myself no, it's nap time. I've given you so many chances. I'm done. And I feel my blood pressure rising. I can feel my Apple Watch tells me I need to breathe. She can sense it. It's this domino effect of escalation, right? And again, my situation is probably different than a lot of yours, but when was the last time you felt that way towards a sibling? You're like, I am tired of telling you over and over again to leave me alone, or to get out of my room, or to stop taking my stuff. Or your parent has asked you over and over again to do something, and you're gonna do it just on your own timeline, right? You have all the time in the world. Why do you have to get it done right this minute? And so you find yourself, again, just getting kind of escalated, and inside you just you just want to scream. So maybe that's happened. Maybe that happened yesterday. Maybe it hasn't happened, and you've just been wonderful and great. And if that is true, then please call me and tell me your secret. Anyway, but again, the point is that every family fights at some point. So we're kicking off this series called Family Feud. And it's really, again, like I said, it's what we do or not do when we find ourselves getting frustrated or fighting with our families. Now, I'm sure families fight in different ways, right? And I think maybe some of you don't even use the word fight. That's just not a word in your family's vocabulary, and wonderful. Some do though, right? And some do use that kind of vocabulary. Some families argue, some families fight, some families have disagreements. One thing that I do think that we all have in common, for sure, is that every single family is made up of imperfect people, including you. And including me, right? None of us are perfect. Middle school for me was really weird. I lived in lots of different places, and I lived with my dad, and it was just him and I. But I specifically remember I went to a private school, and so private school kids obviously can live all over the city. So they're not necessarily zoned, so the kids that went to my school were not necessarily kids that lived close to me. Anyway, and so I had this friend, and I really wanted to go to her house and visit her over the weekend, and my dad was busy and had stuff going on, and he was like, Sheila's 45 minutes away. You should have made this plan earlier. You just told me about it. I have stuff to do. I can't drive you 45 minutes to go see your friend. and I was heartbroken. I was so frustrated and so angry, and I felt like my dad was being so selfish. Like, how could you not take me to see my friend? This is ridiculous. Of course, I'm like 13, I don't drive, right? And I was so angry, and I felt so like let down and frustrated, and I felt like he just didn't care. And I mean, I said some horrible things. I went to my room. I like didn't talk to him all weekend. I was so mad, but you know, I felt, looking back, I may have overreacted. But in the moment, I felt, again, just so frustrated and angry, and felt like my dad was being so incredibly selfish. So I'm going to leave that story there for right now, and we'll come back to it in a little bit. Okay. So again, I'm sure you've heard tons of stories like that before, where people have lost patience with family members, or you've lost your patience with family members. And like I said, we live in a world full of imperfect people. The world is imperfect, right? The Bible introduces us to Adam and Eve, who created original sin, and because of their disobedience with God, we now live in a broken world. So as hard as it is to kind of relate to people that existed so long ago, I think it is important, though, to know that our brokenness stems from them. So you're not broken as in there's something wrong with you because you have feelings that are not always rainbows and sunshine, right? We live in a world that is full of the struggle with greed and selfishness and pride. So you're not alone in feeling that way. So the other thing, because of that, so because we live in this broken world, families are made of people that make mistakes and are selfish and at times deal with greed and pride. And so your family is imperfect. No family is perfect. So after Adam and Eve, so if we go to the beginning of Genesis, so Genesis chapters 1-3, God creates the world. He creates Adam and Eve. The fall happens. They disobey God. They're cast out of the garden, but they do end up starting a family, and they have two sons named Cain and Abel. I'm going to just read a little bit from Genesis chapter 4 to kind of give you an introduction to Cain and Abel and see how the first family started and how imperfect even the first family ever created was. Eve became pregnant. She gave birth to Cain, and she said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, Abel kept flock, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some fruits to the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor upon Abel and his offering, but Cain and his offering did not look with favor. But Cain was very angry, so his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, then sin is crouching at your door." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Ugh, kind of extreme, but it happened. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" Which, like, oh my gosh, I feel like every sibling set has said that at some point to their parents, like, "Where's your brother?" "I don't know. Am I in charge of him?" Like, it's just like, it's so funny. And like, God isn't even technically, I guess, Cain's parent, but I just thought that was so funny. Like, again, this is the very first family that ever existed in the history of creation, and they're struggling. Again, just to show you that even the first family was imperfect, and so is yours, and so is mine. Now, here's the other thing that might be a little hard to swallow, but I think we need to acknowledge this as well, is that you are imperfect, as am I, right? Like, we are all imperfect. As much as it would be super convenient just to always place blame on other people in our family when mistakes are made, we have to acknowledge that we are the ones that are sometimes causing issues as well. Everyone that has ever lived other than Jesus has had some sort of imperfection, as do us. So as much as we don't want to admit it, I'm sure there have been times that you have offended, hurt, frustrated, or annoyed your family members, as have I, right? I'm not just trying to place blame on you. I'm also admitting that I for sure have done those things to my family. So in the past, when I was in high school, as in my family that I'm currently living with right now. Okay, so back to that story. of when I was in high school and I really wanted my dad to take me to a friend's house. So I shared with you my perspective, right? I felt like my dad was being selfish. I felt like he was being inconsiderate. I felt like he didn't care about me. But if I turn it around and think of it from his perspective, right? I didn't give him any warning as to me wanting to do this. He was a single parent. He was working full time. He was busy. And I'm sure it was hard for him to say no, but he didn't know who this person was, didn't know their parents, didn't have any idea of where they lived. This is before, like cell phones were pretty new, GPS was pretty new. It took planning to go and do kind of a weekend, go hang out with your friend like this. And so I think from his perspective, it's understandable, right? Again, I felt like the world was ending, but truly I was the one being kind of selfish and irrational. So perspective 15, 20 years later. Okay, so what are we supposed to do with all of this? What does God call us to do? The first thing God calls us to do, and this is the hardest one, but it's the big one, is to just be patient. The good news is that God is patient with us, and so we have the perfect example of what patience looks like in the Lord who loves us. When Adam and Eve sinned, I'm sure there was some sense of frustration, but I think it was more just disappointment, right? He sought them out. He had a conversation with them, and instead of just reacting out of anger. I think, again, throughout human history, we see examples of people disobeying, hurting, rebelling against God, and constantly he shows compassion, mercy, and grace. And again, we're not God, and so we obviously aren't going to be able to react that way every time. But again, just to see God as the model, and if we know like that's the standard, at least we have something to work towards, right? Like we have a goal, we have something, we have a model set out for us. Okay, so now I'm going to skip to the New Testament. So again, the New Testament was written mostly to the new church. So Jesus has died, he's resurrected, he's ascended into heaven, and so now Acts is the first book right after the Gospels, and it kind of shows the beginning of the church. And pretty much every book after that is letters being written to the brand new church. My Bible, which is kind of cool, I'm sure yours does too, so check it out if you haven't noticed this before, but at the beginning of each book, it kind of has a little introduction to the book and maybe who wrote it and the time frame that it was written in, or who was being addressed in this book. So James in the New Testament, again, was written to a church. What I really like about it though is in my introduction, it says the letter of James shows one of the church's early pastors skillfully going about his work of confronting, diagnosing, and dealing with areas of misbelief and misbehavior that had turned up in congregations committed to his care. So y'all, like even the early church is struggling and they're making mistakes and they're not treating each other well and there's misbelief and misbehaviors and there's things happening. And so this pastor is writing to this church to address this issue. And so again, I think this isn't meant to say, well, they did it, so that's an excuse for us, but it's more of like, again, the world has been imperfect since the beginning of existence. So that's not an excuse to continue to lose patience and get angry, but it's more of, okay, it's been addressed, so what do we do about it? So the beginning of James, so the author introduces himself, he kind of addresses the church, and if we skip down to James chapter 1, verse 19, this is so simple and so straightforward. My brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. All right, it's straightforward what we're supposed to do. Quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. That's it. Right? Easy. Got it. Okay. Okay, what does it mean? Right? So what does it mean to be quick to listen? Okay, to simply listen to someone is, or to hear them, I guess, is to just be quiet when they're speaking. I guess maybe, yeah, that's listening. But I think hearing what someone is saying goes deeper. We have to agree, maybe even internally, maybe not say it out loud, but we have to decide that what they have to say is important and valuable and that you're going to take it in. Now, whether you do agree fully with them or not, the act of listening and hearing them at least acknowledges, I value you and I'm going to listen to you. I think so many of our family fights and arguments could be avoided, or maybe not avoided, but at least de-escalated, so not turning into these crazy yelling matches, if one person decided to listen in order to understand where the other person was coming from. At least I could in my family. I don't know, something to think about. Okay, so the next part is be slow to speak. Now, I think this is kind of addressing if you've ever said something and you immediately regret it. You're like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have said that. That came out way too fast. I wasn't ready. That was not what I meant to say. I definitely have done that. It's gotten a lot better as I've gotten older because I've learned, I think, how to control my emotions a little bit more. Again, not to say that I'm perfect. I definitely still think those things. And now that's kind of my focus on my own life, is be slow to even think about the things that I maybe should or shouldn't say. But to be slow to speak. So choosing your words carefully, knowing that your words are powerful, knowing that once they've come out, you cannot take them back. Whether there's truth or meaning behind them or not, they were still heard and received. So, yes, so being aware of that. The other thing when we're slow to speak is that we tend to, if we're not slow to speak, then we're probably interrupting, right? If we're quick to respond, then we're probably interrupting and we're not allowing the person that's feeling some sort of emotion to fully express what they want to say. Okay, and then the last part, be slow to get angry. Okay, now here's the thing too. Anger is sometimes appropriate, right? Like, it's an emotion, it's valid, it's normal. Anger becomes an issue or sinful when it's explosive, uncontrolled, and it hurts other people, right? We can't always stop ourselves from getting angry. I wish I could, because I hate the feeling of being angry when my stomach hurts and when I'm breathing and I can feel, like I said, my blood pressure rising. I hate that feeling. But being slow to anger is about choosing patience and developing that muscle of self-control, right? It's muscle memory. We have to train it. We have to work on it. So it's something I think that takes effort. Again, it's not something that will just come easily or naturally, but it does take some effort. So, like I said, James's advice is not gonna come naturally to any of us, right? Being quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to anger takes practice and takes effort. But I think what will help us with that is just setting our heart and mind on the things that God is asking us to do, and asking for help and asking for the Holy Spirit. Hey, God, I'm struggling. I know I'm struggling, and I don't know how many more weeks with my family. I want your help, right? I want opportunities to practice these things. Now, I'm not saying to start fights with your family, right? That's kind of the opposite of what I'm saying. But I think just kind of exercising that muscle of showing kindness and respect and the 3 points of advice that James gives us. So again, the big idea, the challenge, be patient with your family the way God is patient with you. Okay, last thing, I'm gonna play a video for you. And while this video is playing, there are some things that I want you, I personally am a journaler. I like writing things down. It makes it a little bit more real for me and helps kind of remind me. It's just a way for me to take it in. So if you're a journaler, write it down. If you are just, I can see it and put it to memory, then that's great, do that. But as we listen to the song, I want you to think about these things. Which of your family members consistently tests your patience? Okay, so who is it? Name them. Now, no one has to, again, if you're writing this down, put it in a safe place. And if someone does find it, you can just explain what this is about, but name them. Then the next thing is, how do you think your family might be transformed if you choose to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry? What could this do for your family, right? Like, how could your siblings and your parents start treating you differently, start treating each other differently if they saw the transformation that was happening through you? Then finally, ask God how you can show patience, kindness, and grace with your family, right? This isn't something that just comes naturally to people. I think we have to pray about it and say, God, like, what does that even look like for me? Because what it looks like for you is going to be different than what it looks like for me. My family situation and my family dynamic is different than yours, right? And your family dynamic and situation is different than the people that you go to school with. Like, no one has an exact same family unit. And so asking God, like, what does this look like for me, for Melissa, for, and there's so many of you watching, right? Like, name yourself and ask God to help you and see what that looks like for your family. And then finally, this one is really cool. Ask God to help you be a peacemaker, right? So maybe you are the one that has a short fuse in your family, and ask God to change that for you and be a peacemaker. Or maybe you already are a peacemaker and people already see you that way. And so ask God to continue to bless you with that, that quality. All right. Yeah, so I hope to see you guys. We're changing the Zoom meeting to 4:12 p.m. and not 6 p.m. So that gives you time to have dinner with your families. So hopefully, yeah, you have time to watch this video, maybe jot some notes down, bring those notes with you if you come onto the Zoom call so that maybe we can talk about it. I hope to see you guys there. Again, this is meant to be a time of just authentic conversation and realness. I hope that you're doing okay. I miss you. I'm here for you. Yeah, I'll see y'all soon.